Scene script. Have you ever wondered how the EU is combating the spread of misinformation during elections? The answer is in the draft guidelines they've proposed. Imagine a world where it's increasingly difficult to tell fact from fiction, especially in the realm of politics. This is precisely the issue that the European Union is taking a stand against. Their target? Large online platforms that have become a playground for misinformation. Platforms like Facebook, Google, TikTok, and Twitter. The goal of these draft guidelines is straightforward yet ambitious: to implement reasonable, proportionate, and effective measures that can address the creation and widespread distribution of AI-generated fake content. We're talking about political deepfakes, content that looks real but is as fabricated as a Hollywood movie. So what are the specific measures proposed in these guidelines? First off, there's watermarking. This involves using metadata to clearly distinguish AI-generated content from genuine material. Think of it as a digital signature, a mark of authenticity for content that's real and trustworthy. Next, we have user warnings. This measure is all about alerting users about potential errors or manipulation in content created with AI. It's like a digital heads-up, a red flag that warns you to think twice before you believe what you see. The guidelines also suggest guiding users towards authoritative sources of information. This measure aims to provide a compass for users navigating the vast and often confusing landscape of online information. Preventing harmful content is another crucial aspect of these guidelines. This involves implementing safeguards to block the creation and dissemination of deepfakes with high potential to influence voters. It's a protective shield against the dark side of AI. Lastly, there's red teaming. This is when platforms proactively test their systems for vulnerabilities to deepfakes and other manipulation tactics. It's like a digital fire drill, preparing the platforms for potential attacks. These are the initial steps the EU is taking to address this modern-day challenge of misinformation. It's a bold move in the chess game of digital democracy, and it's fascinating to see how it will play out. Now that you have an idea about the draft guidelines, you might be wondering about their current status. Well, let's delve into that. As of today, we find ourselves in the midst of an ongoing public consultation. This process kicked off with the unveiling of the draft guidelines and will continue until the 7th of March, 2024. This public consultation period is a critical phase in the development of these guidelines. It offers a window of opportunity for interested parties to contribute to the conversation. Who are these interested parties, you ask? Well, they're a diverse group. They could be representatives from the big tech companies like Facebook, Google, TikTok, and Twitter. They could also be policymakers, technology experts, or even ordinary citizens who are concerned about the impact of deepfakes on our democratic processes. During this public consultation period, these parties are invited to provide feedback on the draft guidelines. They can raise questions, express concerns, propose modifications, or even suggest new measures. The feedback received is then considered and potentially incorporated into the final guidelines. Let's think about this for a moment. This isn't just about a group of people in a boardroom making decisions. It's about collaboration and collective decision-making. It's about creating a set of rules that are informed by a wide range of perspectives and experiences. This process is crucial because it ensures that the guidelines are not only robust and comprehensive, but also practical and implementable. It's not just about what looks good on paper. It's about what works in the real world in the face of real challenges. But remember, this public consultation is not a one-and-done deal. It's a dynamic process. The draft guidelines are not set in stone. They are continuously evolving, shaped and reshaped by the feedback received. This is where we stand today. We're in the thick of a vibrant, ongoing conversation about how to protect our democratic processes from the threat of deepfakes and other forms of online manipulation. So it's a dynamic process with the draft guidelines continuously evolving based on the feedback received. The draft guidelines, if adopted, could have a significant impact on how tech giants operate. Let's delve into that. Imagine a world where the Facebooks, Googles, TikToks, and Twitters of the online universe are held accountable for the content that circulates on their platforms. This is the world the EU's draft guidelines aim to create. By implementing measures to combat the creation and widespread distribution of AI-generated fake content, tech giants could be greatly influenced to step up their game in safeguarding democratic processes. Picture these platforms using watermarking to distinguish AI-generated content from genuine material, or alerting users about potential errors or manipulation in AI-created content. Imagine them guiding users toward reliable sources of information and blocking the creation and dissemination of deepfakes with high potential to influence voters. They could even proactively test their systems for vulnerabilities to deepfakes and other manipulation tactics. But as with any potential solution, there are critics, and these critics argue that the guidelines might be a double-edged sword. On one hand, they could be a tool to protect democracy from online manipulation. On the other hand, they could potentially lead to censorship or stifle legitimate content creation. Think about it. If these guidelines are too stringent, they might discourage creativity and innovation. They might lead to a chilling effect where content creators are too afraid to push the envelope for fear of penalties. And if the guidelines are too broad, they might be used as a tool to silence dissenting voices, leading to a form of digital censorship. The balance, therefore, is delicate. The EU must ensure that the measures are reasonable, proportionate, and effective, as stated in the guidelines. They must protect against the spread of misinformation, but also safeguard freedom of speech and creativity online. As you can see, while the draft guidelines hold promise, they also raise some concerns, making the situation quite complex. These draft guidelines are not a standalone initiative. They're part of a bigger picture. Now let's zoom out a bit and consider this broader context. The European Union's efforts to tackle political deepfakes are just one piece of a more comprehensive strategy. This strategy is embodied in the Digital Services Act, or DSA as it's commonly known. The DSA is a sweeping piece of legislation that aims to regulate online platforms and content. It's a response to the digital age's challenges, where information is disseminated at breakneck speed, often with little regard for its veracity or potential impact. The DSA is about creating a safer, more transparent digital space where users can trust the information they encounter. It's about establishing clear rules for online platforms, ensuring they take responsibility for the content they host. But the DSA isn't just about combating misinformation and manipulation. It also seeks to foster innovation, protect users' rights, and ensure fair competition in the digital market. It's a balancing act, no doubt, between regulation and freedom, between security and innovation. And this delicate balance isn't just a concern for the EU. Similar efforts are underway in other countries across the globe. From the United States to Australia to India, governments are grappling with the same questions. How do we combat misinformation without stifling freedom of speech? How do we protect our citizens without hindering technological progress? Each country, each region has its unique challenges and contexts, yet they are all united by a common goal: to ensure the digital space is safe, reliable, and conducive to democratic discourse. They're all striving to strike the right balance, to find a solution that works not just for their citizens, but for the global community as a whole. So while the draft guidelines we've been discussing are indeed a significant step, they are part of a much larger global endeavor. An endeavor that recognizes the digital era's challenges and opportunities, and strives to navigate them in a way that safeguards our democratic processes, our freedoms, and our future. Thus, the fight against misinformation and online manipulation is not just an EU concern, but a global one. Now that we've covered the draft guidelines, their current status, potential impact, and the bigger picture, let's summarize the key points. The draft guidelines are aimed at large online platforms like Facebook, Google, TikTok, and Twitter. The goal is to implement reasonable, proportionate, and effective measures to address the creation and widespread distribution of AI-generated fake content. These measures include watermarking to distinguish AI-generated content from genuine material, user warnings about potential errors or manipulations in AI-created content, and guiding users towards reliable information sources. The guidelines also call for implementing safeguards to block the creation and dissemination of deepfakes with high potential to influence voters, and for platforms to proactively test their systems for vulnerabilities to deepfakes and other manipulation tactics, a process known as red teaming. As of now, these draft guidelines are undergoing public consultation until the 7th of March, 2024, which means interested parties can provide feedback and suggestions on the proposed measures. If adopted, these guidelines could force tech giants to step up their efforts in safeguarding democratic processes from online manipulation. However, critics argue that the guidelines might lead to censorship or stifle legitimate content creation. This initiative is part of the EU's broader Digital Services Act, which aims to regulate online platforms and content. Similar efforts are underway in other countries, as deepfakes and other forms of online manipulation pose a growing concern for democracies worldwide. As we move forward in this digital age, it's clear that the fight against misinformation and manipulation during elections is far from over. The draft guidelines are just one of many steps being taken to combat the spread of political deepfakes and other forms of online manipulation. Remember, the journey to combating misinformation during elections is a complex one, and these guidelines are just one step in the right direction.